Okay, you guys, the time has come. It's time to go through my eyeshadow palettes. So I have been saving this for the last, partially because there's so much to go through, partially because I was kind of dreading it a little bit. So I've definitely been procrastinating going through these eyeshadow palettes. If you notice, I put 2025 in the title of this. That's simply because we are so far past the end of the year at this point. I didn't want anybody to be confused about how old this video was, but this is the tail end of Declutter and inventory that I began in December. So one of the reasons I have been procrastinating this isn't just because of the size of this, but because I'm not sure how much of this I'm going to be able to convince myself to let go. I did a really ruthless declutter, like half of my eyeshadow palettes gone back in 2023. And then I continued to declutter a few palettes here and there through 2024. So at this point, I'm really not sure what here I am prepared to let go of, but we're just going to go through everything and we're going to see. We're going to see what I can manage. As of my last count, I had 71 eyeshadow palettes. What you're seeing right here on screen is roughly half of those palettes. I'm pretty sure that we're gonna have to split this into 2 videos. So let's just dive in. I haven't picked these out by order of brand or anything like that. This is fully random. That's the way I kind of felt like doing it. So let's jump in and get started. First, this Ofra palette. So this is the signature palette in Symphony, and this I picked up, I think it was Black Friday 2023. Let me cover up this mirror here so it doesn't blind you. This is such a gorgeous palette, and if you know anything about my preferences, you know that this is just right up my alley. Okay, that's swatching terribly, but listen, trust me, this is a beautiful little palette. I definitely haven't gotten the amount of use out of it that I want to. I feel like this is one of those palettes that kind of felt by the wayside in 2024 because it was on the newer side. And during my first year of panning in 2024, I really felt like I needed to be focusing on my older products, trying to hit pan in those ones, finish some things up, and because of that, some of the newer things in my collection, including this one here, kind of got neglected. So one of my goals for 2025 has been to basically give myself permission to enjoy the newer things in my collection rather than focusing so hard on the older products. So I want to see if I can work this into a project or 2 over the next year and get a little bit more use out of it. Let's look at some of these ColourPop palettes. First here, this is my Dream Street palette. This is the Kathleen Lights and ColourPop collab. If you have been watching my videos at all, you'll recognize this as my Pan That palette for last year. It was my Better Together palette. And my goal on this one was to hit pan in 50% of the shades in here, and I managed to do just that. As I mentioned in my finale for the Pan That palette, one of my big struggles with this palette is this is one of my oldest palettes in my collection, and it definitely is suffering from its age. The quality of these shadows really has deteriorated quite a bit, and so that made it a little bit of a struggle to get my use on it, but we did make it. However, at this point, I have 0 problems letting this one go. It really is quite long in the tooth at this point. I got a ton of use on it in 2024. I'm super pleased with that. I have no problems letting this one go at this point. So we're going to go ahead and declutter that one. Then we have this one. This is my Boudoir Noir. Now I want to make a note about my ColourPop declutters. I'm going to have a few declutters for my ColourPop palettes. But with the exception of the Dream Street, which is just, it's going in the trash. It is too old for use by man or beast. It is time for it to go 100%. For my other ColourPop declutters though, the ones that are no longer useful to me as palettes, I'm gonna label them as declutters. However, ColourPop palettes are magnetic, which I think is fabulous. And the majority of the ColourPop palettes that I have do have this same pan size here. So what I'm going to be doing is I will be decluttering some of these, but I will hang on to them temporarily, and then I'm going to film a video where I bring all of my ColourPop palettes together and I do a little bit of switcheroo. For instance, this is a palette that I am inclined to declutter. I had it in a project last year and I realized everything that I want to do in this palette, I can do more easily and with better results from other palettes that I have. It's a pretty palette, but it's not necessary for me to hang on to this one given the other things that I have in my collection. However, there are a couple of shades in here that I still do feel kind of work for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather together at the end of all of this, I'm going to gather together all of my ColourPop palettes. I'm going to swap out a few of the shades in order to tweak some of these ColourPop palettes to just be a little bit more up my alley. So while I am technically going to consider this one a declutter, it's not going to be exiting my collection physically just yet. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So I think this is one of the ones that I'm going to be letting go, although a couple of these may be ultimately staying in my collection. The palette as a whole will be going. Now these two I am not going to be able to do that with, and that is because they are the larger pan size. And so the only ones that I could switch anything out with here are with each other. And I don't think I will end up doing, I might. There are a couple of things in here that aren't my favorite. For instance, Reflect and Divine here. These are not my favorite shades, and I don't reach for them as much as the other ones. And I don't know, there might be a couple of things in here that I could bring over to this one, but I'm absolutely keeping the 1111 palette. I adore this palette. These tones are just delightful for me. This palette is the reason, this is single-handedly the reason I've been able to resist both I Need a Nude and the Huda Beauty Icy Nude palette. Now, obviously, this palette is not a dupe for either one of those, but the shadows that really attract me the most in the Icy Nude and in the I Need a Nude are ones that I can get a fairly similar result from the shadows in this palette. So I really, really love this palette. This one I struggle to love a little bit more. I did have it in my ColourPan project last year, and once I forced myself to use it, I ended up enjoying it quite a bit more than I expected to. But at the same time, it's just, I don't know, it's just not a palette that I look at and feel wildly inspired by. So I have not yet decided whether or not there's a couple of these that I want to switch around, or if I just want to go ahead and pass on this Troublemaker palette as it is. So this one I'm going to count as a declutter, and this one here absolutely is going to be a keep. Okay, so this is the Off Melrose palette. And the thing that struck me about this one was how similar, look at these two. The 1111 palette here could be the Melrose palette's big sister. It really could. I mean, we've got kind of a more gold yellow here with just a hint of green in it. And then we have this much softer shimmer that's a little bit lighter than this one here, but there is a lot of similarities here. I'm not 100% sure that I need to keep both of these, but the Off Melrose palette is a pretty recent purchase, and I really haven't gotten the chance to play with it as much as I would like to. So for that purpose, I'm gonna go ahead and keep both of these. Then here's my BH Cosmetics. I adore this Blueberry Muffin palette. Now, it got so much buzz back in the day, and it was all well-deserved. This is a gorgeous palette. It is the only blue palette of mine that I have hung on to rather than decluttering. Blues in general really aren't my jam. I don't reach for them often, but when I do want a blue, this has everything I could possibly want. Because of how unique it is in my collection with all of these blues and these cooler tones here, I am going to hang on to this one. I can't see myself honestly ever letting this one go. I feel the same about the Avocado Toast palette. This is one I definitely reach for a little bit more often. Greens are not something that I reach for on a daily basis, but I do enjoy a good green eye look, and this makes some really, really gorgeous green eye looks. There's enough variation here in the shades and in the undertones that it can really make a wide variety of looks. This palette and my ColourPop The Child palette is one of the reasons why I feel so comfortable letting go of the ColourPop Boudoir Noir, because anytime I'm really going for that olivey green, grungy eye look that I'm going to get out of the Boudoir Noir, I can get it from this palette or from the Child palette, and it's going to do a better job almost every single time. So I can't see myself ever letting go of either one of these palettes. Now this one here is a little bit of a different story. I kind of picked it up just to make the set complete here, but this isn't, oh gosh, it's so pretty though. It's so pretty. Of the three, I probably use this one the least. This is a really nice white shade. BH Cosmetics is just You know what? No, I'm going to hang on to this one. I don't get a ton of use out of this one. This is something that I really reach for more often during the summer. During the summer, when I have a little bit of a tan, I have a more golden overtone to my skin that comes out a little bit more and makes warmer tones on my skin tone just a little bit more flattering. So that's usually when I reach for this type of thing. I don't use it a ton. I can't let go of it. BH Cosmetics is no more. The formula in all three of these palettes are impeccable. I mean, gorgeous. And when I do want one of these colors, there's nothing in my collection that does it better. So for that reason alone, I'm going to go ahead and keep all three of these. I just can't let any of them go. Can't do it. I can't do it. This is the Milani Soft and Sultry. This was a gift from my husband a couple of years ago for my birthday, and I think that's the reason why I've hung on to this one so long, and the reason why I'm probably not going to declutter it at this point, despite the fact that everything I can do with this palette, I can probably do with other palettes in my collection. Well, I know I can do them with other palettes in my collection. For instance, like even just reaching for these ones here. This is the Shadow Kiss palette from Alter Ego. Very, very similar tones. And then I have this one here. This is the Profusion Smoky palette. This is such a grungy looking palette. I've gotten so much use out of this. Unlike these two, it has a little bit of color in here, in this kind of reddish brown here, and then it's got a purple here. All three of these palettes are beautiful palettes, and I don't need to keep all three. This Profusion one, this one cost me like, I don't know, $5, $10. I can't remember how much it cost me, but it was a song, and it's just, this is a gorgeous palette. Well, I don't know, that didn't swatch very well, but I have never been disappointed by the quality of the shadows in this palette. If you're looking for just a really nice neutral eyeshadow palette, it's hard to beat this one. This one is just gorgeous. At the same time, I don't need all three of these. I think I'm actually going to let the Profusion go, the Profusion Smoky. You can tell by the state of this cover. This has been in my collection for quite a while. I've gotten an enormous amount of use out of it. We've got two pans in here, which, if you know anything about the way I use makeup, I have a very short attention span. It is very unusual for me to use the same palette over and over and over again. I tend to like to bounce around and try different things. So to have pan in it at all really says something, but simply because this palette is as old as it is, it's significantly older than either of these two here. I'm going to go ahead and let go of the Smoky palette. This is really a phenomenal palette though. Fantastic, and the price cannot be beat. I'm going to go ahead and hang on to both of these two. Again, I probably don't need both of these, but I am really enjoying the Shadow Kiss. I do enjoy the Alter Ego formula. You'll see I have actually quite a few Alter Ego palettes. And so, yeah, this isn't one that I want to let go. And this one, I'm just a little too sentimental about this one to let go, but I don't really want to retire it into my makeup memory box yet either. So I'm going to go ahead and hang on to both of these. Speaking of Alter Ego, okay, we also have Mirage and we have Harmony. So Harmony, this one is a dupe for, gosh, I can't remember which one of, is it the Retro palette? It's one of the Natasha Denona palettes. It's got some beautiful shades in here. It's got these purpley, pinky, mauvey colors in here, some deep maroons. This is my sort of color story. And yeah, it's gorgeous. It's right up my alley. I really enjoy this palette. I'm going to go ahead and hang on to this one. Now, the Mirage is a little bit newer. This is a dupe of, I think it was the Huda Beauty Empowered palette, which I actually considered purchasing the Huda Beauty version, but I ultimately ended up going with the Alter Ego. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of warmth in this palette, and that's not usually something that I really enjoy. Oh my gosh, this pyramid shade is just flaking off everywhere. The warmth in this palette is not really something I usually enjoy. I've got a lot of very orange tones over here, and so knowing that this color story wasn't wildly up my alley, I did not want to spend Huda Beauty money on it. And that is actually what I enjoy Alter Ego the most for, is allowing me to explore some color stories that maybe aren't 100% in my wheelhouse without spending an arm and a leg. So I have actually found that I really enjoy this part of the palette here. I have not really used the creams very much at all. I mostly stay away from this part of the palette here, although I may get a little bit more use out of that during the summertime. But this part of the palette I actually have really enjoyed, including this carrot shade, which I really didn't, it's got so much yellow in it, and that's not usually the type of gold that I prefer, but I have actually gotten some use out of it. And as a whole, I have really enjoyed this palette, and I'm going to go ahead and hang on to it as well. Another Alter Ego palette that we have here is the Midsummer. I can't remember the name of the Anastasia palette that this was duped for, but I will put it up on the screen. Again, this wasn't a color story I was 100% sure I was going to be in love with, but I actually ended up really enjoying the interesting color variety that there is here. I mean, obviously we've got quite a lot of greens here. I really do like these grungy green colors. It's not wildly unique in my collection. I have the Avocado Toast palette. I have the Child palette. I have some other green leaning color stories, but I really enjoy the selection of neutrals that was paired with this and this lavender. I know a lot of people felt like, what is the lavender doing in there? Green and purple are actually opposites on the color wheel, and because of that, I really feel like you can take opposite colors like a blue and an orange or a green and a purple, and you can create some really interesting color variation in your eyeshadow looks, and I have done that a few times and have really enjoyed it. I don't know that this is an absolute favorite among my Alter Ego palettes, but I am enjoying it for the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and continue to hang on to it for now. I have a couple of Odin's Eye palettes here, both of which I'm going to keep. I recently did a purple and green eyeshadow look that a lot of you commented on. I think it was in my February roundup, I think it was, and that came from this palette. The Odin's Eye formula. I'm a little bit divided about the Odin's Eye formula. I do enjoy their mattes, and while their shimmers are pretty, I do find them a little bit firm in the pan. They're just not quite as creamy as I necessarily want them to be when I'm using them. Gosh, they are pretty though. The looks that I turn out from these Odin Eye palettes, I can't complain about. And I actually think that's my favorite thing about Odin's Eye. It's not necessarily the formula. I do think I have other formulas in my collection that beat out the Odin's Eye formula. However, I find the color stories from Odin's Eye to be incredibly interesting. Now, this is the Hella palette. This was the Odin's Eye collab with Angelica Nyqvist, and she is the one that selected these colors. I think she has a fabulous eye for a color. She has a warm undertone, and so she does tend to lean a lot warmer in her color choices than I generally prefer on my cool olive undertone. However, I have really enjoyed this particular palette. I think the only ones that I really don't get a ton of use on are these three kind of grungy, more mustardy colors, which I know are a big favorite of hers, but just don't read right on my complexion. But the other shades in this palette, they're lovely. I really love. The shimmers are beautiful. I really enjoy the color variation in here. I love the value variation in here, where we got something very light, and we also have some things that are very dark. And Angelica and I both share that taste for like some strong value contrast. Anyway, I have really enjoyed this palette, and I'm going to go ahead and hang on to it. The Jewels and Gems palette definitely is a little bit more up my alley as far as the undertone goes. This is a much cooler color story. One of the things that I loved the most about this was this palette surprised me with the color variation in here. I ended up with several looks from this palette that were unlike anything that I normally would have put together myself, but I ended up absolutely adoring. And any palette that can surprise me in that way after having used makeup for as long as I have, and I've been pretty adventurous in my makeup usage over the time that I have been using makeup, any palette that can surprise me with the interesting color combinations and variations that I can come up with, especially the really unusual and somewhat unexpected undertones that I find in some of these duo and multi-chromes here, I it's very unusual for me to be surprised by an eyeshadow palette. And this one did that for me. And because of that, and also because it has so many of the things in it that I'm predisposed to enjoy, this whole top row here, you know, is right up my alley. That juxtaposition of the purples and the greens, which I find very, very interesting. I really, really enjoy this palette. I've had so much fun with it. And I can't tell you how delightful it is to be surprised by a color story in an eyeshadow palette after all of this time. So yeah, I'm definitely hanging on to this one as well. Here is one that I feel like I can let go. This is the mini Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette. I love a good neutral palette. I especially love a good neutral palette with a pop of color. I find the Urban Decay formula to be a little bit underwhelming. The thing that I want from this palette, I don't quite get it. It's not a bad palette, and the formula is not bad. There's one particular look that I'm going for every time I reach for this palette, and every time I do that look, I find myself just a little bit underwhelmed. That's just the honest truth of it. I think if you were someone that was less into a full-on eye look than I am, and we're just interested in just a very light wash of color, I think this would be a lot more up your alley. But for me, the Urban Decay formula just does not suit my personal preferences and what I'm looking for in an eyeshadow. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this one. Something that does suit my preferences, honestly, I think we can call it now. I'm probably not going to be getting rid of any of my Pat McGrath eyeshadow palettes. This is the Bridgerton, one of the Bridgerton collab palettes. This is Mothership Belle of the Ball. This is another one that I picked up just because I was so intrigued by the color combinations in this. There are some unexpected shades in here that you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of to pair together, but they work so well. Do you see that? Gosh, that is so pretty. I have come up with some really, really interesting and fun eye looks out of this palette, and this was one of my first experiences with Pat McGrath eyeshadows, and I absolutely 100% fell in love after using this palette. This is the kind of full-on, say it with your chest type of eyeshadow formulas that just really speaks to my heart. You know, there is nothing timid or quiet about this eyeshadow formula. At the same time, though, I have heard a lot of people say that they're a little bit put off by Pat McGrath's eyeshadows because they seem so full on. And I will agree that they can be extremely full on. But this is actually one of the things that I learned to really, really love about Pat McGrath is even these shimmers, okay? Yes, you can wear it foiled like that, absolutely. But if you just take the tiniest amount, it's easier if you have a little fluffy brush to do it. You can buff out this shimmer into one of the most beautiful and delicate, lightweight washes of shimmer over the eyelid. Pat McGrath just offers one of the most incredibly versatile collections of eyeshadow formulas, and that extends across her mattes and her shimmers. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know if the camera's picking that up. Do you see how evenly all of that shimmer dispersed over my hand? It's not clumping up in any particular place. And these shimmers can be worn in either way. You can either build them up to full foil, or you can disperse them out into this beautiful just veil of shimmer. Her mattes are similarly very, very versatile because you can start with just the lightest wash of color. And if you wanted to stop there, you absolutely could, okay? But then if you want to build this up to be a more true to pan color, you can absolutely do that as well. The sophistication of this formula is something that I feel like a lot of people miss. I hear a lot of people in comments saying, you can go to Indie and get something more impressive. If what you're looking for is this full foil, absolutely Indie does it better. But I don't know of another eyeshadow formula. Danessa Myricks, I think, I don't think she's not a dupe for Pat. She is absolutely a contender. She is definitely Pat's competition because they both produce some of the most sophisticated and versatile eyeshadow formulas. There's something to be said about any artistic medium that is this pliable and willing to do exactly what you need it to do in any given circumstance. So anyway, I have gone on and on a little bit too much. I love this palette. I love how unusual this color story is. I'm absolutely in love with the formula. Definitely hanging on to this one. And let's be honest, all of Pat's stuff, let's spoil it now, I'm hanging on to all of my Pat McGrath palettes. So let's look at the other ones that I have here real quick. I have a few. This is Pat's only, I think this is her only all matte palette. This is the Velvet Liaison palette. It was her Valentine's release for 2023. This one I actually I waited and I picked it up and I was able to find it in a TJ Maxx. Can't remember exactly how much I paid for it, but it was so much less than retail. As much as I am in love with Pat's formula, the prices are wild. The prices really, really are wild. And so my advice for you, if you want to try out Pat's formulas, is wait for a sale. Check through your discount stores. Pat's stuff does pop up in there fairly regularly, which I don't necessarily think is the best choice for her brand. I think that devalues her brand a little bit. But hey, you know, it's good for my wallet. My wallet cannot complain. These are really, really beautiful mattes. This is a gorgeous collection of mattes. We've got a couple of warm shades. We have some more neutral shades and a couple that lean a little bit cooler. This is a beautiful palette. I haven't gotten a ton of use out of this one simply because I picked this up in combination with like 6 other palettes around at the same time. And so I haven't given this one the attention that it deserves, but I need to reach for this one a little bit more because it is a beautiful palette. Either by itself, I do love an all matte look, or in combination with any other shimmer. Lovely palette. Definitely keeping this one. Then we've got some of her quints here, and her quints historically have some of the creamiest and most foiled shimmers that Pat has in her collection. This one here is, let's see, this is the Celestial Nirvana Nude Allure palette. Right up my alley. You know that these are my colors, you know? Now these are not special shades, but oh my gosh. They are so creamy and delightful. These are beautiful. I'm not getting rid of any of these. Let's look at this one. So this is one of my newer ones that I picked up. I think I picked it up at the beginning of the last year. This was the Lunar Nightshade. This is from the Bijou Brilliance collection. This is a more unusual color story for me, but these shades are just so pretty that I've actually gotten more use. Like I have gotten more use out of these green blue colors, which aren't really my usual cup of tea, than I expected to when I picked them up. So beautiful. I don't feel like the camera does them justice. I really don't. Then we have this one. This is the Celestial Nirvana Bronze Bliss. Also gorgeous, and it has one of the most incredible silver shades that I have ever experienced. It's got almost a mirror-like finish. Now I think I have some indie shadows that are this level of reflectiveness, but I don't think this one is nearly as creasy as those other ones. Generally speaking, when you have an indie shadow that has this kind of reflectivity, there's a lot of emollients in the formula. And this one is just a beautiful soft powder that just lays together. So, just look at that. Just look at it. Anyway, love these all. Definitely keeping them. Last one I have here on the table to look at from Pat McGrath. This was her holiday collection. I think this might have been Christmas 2022. I can't quite recall. I got it significantly after the fact for like half price, which I'm pleased with, but I haven't gotten nearly the amount of use out of this as I should have. Look at this. This is gorgeous. The number of looks that can come out of this, the range in this palette is gorgeous. The quality, as usual, is beautiful. I have zero complaints about the quality of the shadows in this palette. Beautiful palette. I definitely need to get a little bit more use out of it. Here's one I do think I can let go. This is the W7 Socialite palette. This is a really, really pretty palette. This was a spot-on dupe for the Huda Beauty. I can't remember. Was it the New Nudes? I can't remember. It wasn't the Naughty Nudes, because I remember the Naughty Nudes had more of a cool shade in it. I think it might have been the New Nudes. This has just gorgeous formulas in it. I was really surprised. This is a W7 palette. Incredibly affordable. I don't know if W7 makes this palette anymore, but it just was a gorgeous, gorgeous palette. The mattes are beautiful and blendable. There's a couple of pressed glitters in here that I don't care for at all. But these shimmer shades here, they're the type of shimmer shade, it's hard to get these on a brush. So if you don't want to use them on a finger, I would recommend something like the Morphe silicone tool that I have talked to you guys about. You can also use any of those silicone tools that come with, if you've ever had the Laneige lip sleeping mask, the little silicone spatula that comes with that is really good for picking up these really like kind of overly creamy shimmery shades. But yeah, these are just beautiful shadows. I didn't really love the cream over here. I never really got on board with that one as a base because I didn't really feel like it set down enough to be a base. So I kind of skipped that one over. But yeah, these are beautiful shadows. They still perform beautifully. I think the only reason I'm going to go ahead and let this one go is because everything that I can do with this palette, I have it like 10 times over in other palettes. And this one is getting a little bit older in my collection. And so while it is still usable, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass this one on to a friend who I think can get more use out of it than someone like me with such an enormous collection, while the formula is still good, while it's still usable, while I still feel comfortable passing it on to somebody else. So yeah, beautiful palette. I have no objection to the quality of this or the color story. It's gorgeous. I just think that somebody else may be able to get better use out of this palette than I can at this particular point. So gonna go ahead and pass this one on. Okay, now I couldn't let go of any of my BH Cosmetics, the Brunch series, but I think I might be able to get rid of at least one of these. This is the Lost in Los Angeles palette. The thing that I dip into the most with this palette is this white. It is there's a dip in it. You can't see, but this is the best white I have ever used in my entire life. I have never come across another white shadow that is as creamy and opaque and stays put and isn't chalky. It's just, look at that. Look at it. That's just, I've never experienced a better white shadow than the one that's in here. I also do get some use out of these purples and this blue here. I have a particular eye look that I keep coming back to. Everything else in here is beautiful. I have no complaints about the formula or the color story. I don't do a ton of pastel looks, and I'm never going to come to this palette for a whole eye look simply because for me personally, it doesn't have the depth in value that I'm looking for. Most of what's in here is kind of, it has this really, really light white, which I can then use to lighten any of these other pastels, but there's nothing particularly dark in this palette. And so I don't get a lot of value contrast, which is something that I really enjoy in a palette. So this is definitely a companion palette for me. However, I enjoy this shadow so much. I just don't think I'm ever going to get rid of this palette. Maybe one day when I use the last crumbs of this white shadow, then I will feel comfortable passing it on, but not until then. The Trendy in Tokyo palette is a rainbow palette. The two of these together, I feel like constitute the majority of the color in my eyeshadow collection. And because of that, I'm gonna hang on to both of these. I really don't have shades like this in the rest of my collection. They're not necessarily palettes that I really reach for on a super regular basis because I'm much more of a neutrals with a pop of color. However, if I have a neutral palette and I need that pop of color, this is where I can come for that. So this really covers all of my bases when it comes to really bright saturated colors in my collection. And I'm happy having both of them in my collection. This is one that I think I might be able to let go. Not because it's not beautiful. It is beautiful. I really do enjoy a lot of these tones. And to be honest, the formula is just unmatched. It's gorgeous. There is this shade here. I don't think I have anything quite like this silver / gold / purple. It's just, that is a pretty unique shade in my collection. Really, really love that one. Beautiful champagne, although I've got plenty of those. This is such a pretty palette, but to be honest, I hesitate to reach for it because of the number of blues in it. Blue really isn't up my alley, and the number of reds in it. And those are two things that I use very sparingly in my eyeshadow looks. I don't know. Gosh, this is such a beautiful palette though. And the formula is so phenomenal. I think I'm gonna let this one go. I had it in a project last year and I don't think I've reached for it since. So as beautiful as this palette is, I'm just not reaching for it. I'm not reaching for it. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead and declutter this one, but we're gonna go ahead and keep both of these. Oh, a couple more Pat McGrath. These are really, really cute little pocket palettes that Pat McGrath has. These are every bit as lovely formula-wise as her larger palettes. I don't know why I don't reach for them more often. I'm gonna hang on to both of these. Looking at them, I'm realizing it has been a while since I've reached for either one. The metallics in here aren't super blingy or foiled. They're nice, but there are no special shades in here. She doesn't have any of her super foiled ones or her really sparkly ones. She doesn't have any of her formulas in here that I think are really wow factor. So I think if this is your first experience with Pat McGrath, you're probably gonna think, well, that's nice, but what's all the fuss about? That's probably what your response is going to be. But as for me, someone who's already wildly impressed by Pat's formulas and who really, really appreciates her mattes, I'm perfectly happy with these. I do need to get a little more use out of both of these. Have you noticed a trend? I really have kind of neglected my Pat McGrath collection over this last year, again, trying to work on some of my older products. So I need to give these a little bit more love. We are definitely hanging on to them though. Okay, just a few more. Let's look at these are my Natasha Denona minis. I have one more. Let's just look at all of these all at once because I'm not getting rid of any of these. I think these two are my most recent purchases. I picked both of these up at the end of 2024. I have really enjoyed them both. I think this one is my favorite. This is the mini Starlet palette. It has got those pinky, slightly cooler shades that I really, really enjoy, but with a little bit more gray mixed into them. So I almost feel like someone took a mini rose palette and then just mixed a little bit more gray into some of those shades. This one has a little bit more color depth as well, but I really like the gray tones in these mattes here. That just really makes the palette for me. I find it very flattering on my muted, cool olive skin tone. I tend to have a little bit more gray in my skin tone than is common, I guess, based on my difficulty finding a foundation that is desaturated enough for me. So I really do enjoy that one. This was my absolute favorite. This one is it's a little bit more saturated than either of these, and it's a little bit more warm. So it's not my absolute favorite when it comes to neutrals. Obviously, this is just a whole lot of neutrals here. So this one isn't my absolute favorite, but it is a good, solid neutral palette that I have enjoyed and gotten quite a lot of use out of. You can see these ones are just slightly more saturated than these more grungy versions. This has got a cream, her cream to powder formula here, which I don't love. I would rather she just give me a powder. I am not in love with the cream to powder formula, but overall, I still think it's a solid neutral palette. I am pleased with all four of these and intend to keep them all. Speaking of questionable cream to powder formulas, Huda is known for some of those. This is her Cool Matte Obsessions palette. I know this one got a lot of mixed reviews, but me personally, I really enjoyed this palette. And you can tell why. Look at it's got those cool kind of grungier purples in there that you know that I love. There is one shade, there it is. That's the one. Do you see, this is my only complaint with this palette. Do you see this in the palette here? And then see it on my hand? It is so much lighter and warmer than what you're seeing in the palette here. I feel like it's a little bit of a catfish. That is my only complaint about this palette. The rest of these shades, obviously this color story is absolutely right up my alley. This is my type of color story. It's got some value depth in here. It's got that overall cooler undertone in there, with the exception of this one. And this one has a little more warmth in it as well. But even that one has a little bit more of a red base than a yellow base, which makes it a little bit more wearable for me. Anyway, I know that this one got a lot of mixed reviews. There were a lot of people who were not particularly impressed with this palette. I just was not one of them. This really, really loved this little 9 pan, and I will continue to love it. Last one here, this is my Tarte Pro to Go. This was the fun size palette that I worked on for my Pan That palette last year. This is just a beautiful little neutral palette. It's one of the oldest palettes in my collection, like the other one, the Dream Street palette that I worked on, but unlike the Dream Street palette, the formula in this one has really, really held up well. These two colors are the ones that I have made a Franken out of. I've got a little 5-gram jar in my single shadow collection. You would have seen that in my last inventory video where I showed you all of my singles. But the two of these together with a little bit of this makes just the most gorgeous one and done shadow. It also smells like chocolate, which I don't know what couldn't be improved by smelling a little bit more like chocolate, especially because it smells like actual chocolate, not fake chocolate, actual chocolate. I really enjoy this little palette. I've continued to use it even after finishing my Pan That palette project, and I will continue to use it. It's just a solid little neutral palette. I have no complaints about this one. Love traveling with this because it is such a delightful little size. I think of all of the other palettes that I have, the one that I think comes the closest to this one is this little Pat McGrath here. But this one is just, it leans a little bit cooler than this one does here. So is it doing anything new and groundbreaking in my collection? Is it wildly unique? No. But what it does so well that I have no complaints. And I am going to continue to keep this around for the time being. Okay, so that is about half of my eyeshadow palette collection. So let's just look at what I'm letting go of. It's not a ton. I didn't expect that there would be. To be honest, this is a little bit more than I thought I would let go of. I didn't expect to let go of either of these. And this one I was on the fence about just because I haven't gotten a ton of use out of it. And yes, I could keep it and try it a little bit more. But to be honest, I don't know that it's worth it to me to spend any more time on this little palette, given the fact that I have so many other beautiful palettes that I don't have enough time to play with. Does that make sense? So we are letting go of 6 eyeshadow palettes, and we're keeping... Oh, wait a second. No. We're letting go of 7 palettes. I forgot about this one, which I am also decluttering it. I put it in the wrong pile. So we're letting go of 7. And then we're keeping okay, we're keeping 29, getting rid of 7. That's not a huge ratio, but to be perfectly honest, it's a little bit more than I thought I would be letting go of. I will, of course, at the end of my next video, once we have gone through all of my eyeshadow palettes, this is just about half of them, I will give you a final tally of all of the eyeshadow palettes that are going out and how many we are hanging on to. But yeah, this is what we've got for now. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!